Good evening, everyone. Well, thank you so much, April, for coming back to Berkeley to join us this evening. As Dean Harrison mentioned, you went to another great public university, UT Austin. Has admittedly a better football team than we do. But in any case, when we had dinner this evening, you said you started out intending to major in engineering, chemical engineering, but you ended up transitioning into management of information systems and ended up in an honors business program. Can you tell us kind of what led you down that path to change majors?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so exciting to be here on campus and to get to spend time with two deans on one night. This is awesome. This was not what my normal evenings looked like when I was here on campus, so I feel very privileged. So you're right. So I actually I'm from Texas. Any Texans? See, I was going to make the joke I always make when it's silent and say, well, I would have known because they would have said, whoop, and then you did it. So that's awesome. Thank you. So I grew up in Texas, and I actually got into Cal and almost came to Cal. But I stayed in Texas and went to University of Texas because I had an incredible number of scholarships that allowed college to be more affordable for my family. And I was the first person in my family to really have sort of a traditional college experience. By traditional, I just mean that I graduated high school in May and I went to college and lived on campus in the fall. And so when I went to college, to be honest, I didn't know a lot about what most of the majors were when I had done my application. And I had been doing well in chemistry in high school, so I chose chemical engineering. And then I got to campus, and I immediately went in with like full gusto and ran to be the freshman representative of the chemical engineering organization. And then the first time we were going to go to a company visit, we were reminded to bring our hard hats and our steel-toed boots. And that was the moment where I realized I had no idea what chemical engineering was at all. And in Texas, oil and gas is the most common industry that you would go into with that major. And so it was just, it was a wake-up call for me that there was actually a much bigger world out there, that actually what I thought I knew, that path was going to be was quite different from reality. And conversely, I had gotten to know some other students in my dorm that were doing business honors. And, frankly, many of their parents had worked in business, and they just seemed to have a sense of what these paths were like. And I started to get to absorb some of that through osmosis. And so I quit my major. I gave up all my scholarships, which was a really hard thing to do. But I got a part-time job doing tech support for internet service providers. And this was in 1998 with a dial-up modem. So people wanted to be on the internet so badly that they were willing to do things like reinstall their modem drivers and sit on the phone with tech support like me to figure out how to get on the internet. And so we would be helping people who were, really just very confused by the box and the screen and everything that was going on with this computer that their kids had put in their house, but they wanted to get on the internet, and we helped them do it. And along the way, I ended up learning to code, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But that part-time job that happened off campus was what led me to change my major and what really got me on the path towards technology that I'm on today. And I was just on campus at UT Austin, really commenting on how Austin, similar to the Bay Area, gives you the opportunity to learn on campus, but also to be able to learn in the broader industry that surrounds the campus. So that was a kind of a breakthrough for me and helped me find my passion for technology.
That's wonderful. So you met people who were passionate or excited about business, and that inspired you, and also you had to support yourself, so that's how you ended up learning to code?
That's right. Well,
self-taught.
It's a little bit more complicated than that. So I started this part-time job, and the truth was that helping people figure out how to get online was not the most fun job in the world. And so I started to realize that if I learned to code, I could actually start building the training modules for the other people that worked in the call center. So we'd sit in these long rows. And so, you get a call, you answer it, and then once you start to diagnose that person's problem, you're basically going through sort of this like tree of if-then statements where you're figuring out what problems they have, and then you're reading the script back to them and guiding guiding them through the steps that they need to take. But those screens were really ugly and hard to navigate. And so I, over Christmas break, read the O'Reilly HTML book, which is more of a resource guide. So it's sort of funny that I just read it, but I just kind of read through it over the Christmas holidays and the winter holidays. And I taught myself enough to code to be able to come back. And eventually I started doing this, and then I started to ask my managers, hey, could I just do this? Could I still get paid for the hour I do this? Which is a funny thing to think about now. But I sort of thought they were letting me do a fun project. And then I started to realize that was actually probably something I'd get paid more for than what I'd been doing before. And it allowed me to get off the phones.
That's fantastic. So did that experience also help you get your first internships while you were a student? I know you had a number of internships, let's say, from big companies like 3M and then the consulting company Deloitte. How did that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So I changed my major my sophomore year. I applied to a program that they have at UT Austin called the Business Honors Program, which is modeled somewhat on the idea of an MBA, but then I also I chose management information systems, which was you took a number of coding classes. I took a CS class, but you learned less CS sort of fundamentals and theory and more application of sort of coding techniques on the Microsoft Access stack. And so I was taking that coursework, but I kind of felt like I was behind because I'd changed my major. And so I was very, very aggressive in attending as many company nights as I could and going up and speaking to, speakers after classes and so forth. And so I really kind of hunted down that first 3M internship. And I'd only been coding for, at that point, probably 6 months, but I'd been doing it in an actual work setting, and so I really fought hard to get them to give me a chance to interview, and then I got an internship where I got to build internal software tools for the summer, and then it sort of starts snowballing. Then it gets the first opportunity is hard to get, and then the next one is half as hard and easier, and then that just continues your entire career.
All right, sounds like a good model or example for our students here, many of you are probably looking or planning for internships and eventually full-time jobs. So how did you come about making a decision when you were getting ready to graduate, which company to work for? I think you mentioned you worked for Intel for a little while and then Travelocity at a really interesting time. Can you tell us a little bit about how you went about choosing the permanent positions?
Yeah, well, one thing that I did, from the story I already told about the tech support place, is I took that as a part-time job. It was in the newspaper, in the school newspaper. It was paid $10 an hour, which I was very excited about because I needed that money. But then I actually found opportunity. I found problems, and I took the initiative to go solve those problems, and then that actually turned into work experience that helped me get an internship, the next internship. And then, so when I worked at 3M, I actually ended up doing good work during the summer. And because I knew I would be working part-time, I asked them if there would be the opportunity for me to continue working on a contracting basis. So then the next year, I worked a few hours a week at 3M. I would go out to the office and I would just keep working on the project, adding more features to the software that I had built over the summer. And, and that was a really great opportunity for me to be able to, come out of school actually with real work experience, not just, maybe 8 weeks or 12 weeks in the summer, but that continuity of having also, sort of had, actually doing paid technical work, during the school year was really valuable for me. So I graduated in a pretty tough semester from an economy standpoint. My September 11th, 2001, I was in class in my final semester of college. We had Southwest Airlines coming to speak that day. I actually really was interested in working for Southwest Airlines, and so that was a day in which the world is really significantly changed, but it had a profound impact on the economy. And so I graduated in December of 2001 at a time in which a lot of companies were not only not hiring, but many of them that had made offers to students actually rescinded them. And so this is a real thing that can happen in the world, and it seems to happen once every, 5 5 to 10 years or something, that there's such a pullback that companies just can't plan in advance. So they, especially I think students, can sometimes get hit hard by that because they're trying to plan for what they think they need a year from now or next summer, and then the world changes, and then the business has to make changes. And so I was in a situation where actually most of my classmates were really having a hard time finding jobs, and I actually had my graduation. I had my last day of class not knowing where I was going to work, and I'd passed on one opportunity actually because I'd worked at Deloitte Consulting for the summer, and I hated the travel. I hated having to be out of town every week. So I'd said no to that opportunity. So here I was kind of like hanging on a limb. I had a plan B lined up, which was to go back and work for 3M again. So, you kind of build these things over time. You start to build yourself what I would call optionality, which is just you've got a plan A, plan B, plan C. You've got people out there you've worked with who know you, who trust you, where if you find yourself in a spot and you need to find work to fill some gaps, you know who you're going to call, and you know that they think very highly of you, and maybe they're in a position of power to be able to help give you some sort of opportunity. So I had a plan, I had a backup plan, but I actually got the opportunity to work at Intel, the day after my last final. And so I went to Intel. Frankly, I didn't know anything about it, but it was, I knew about Intel, and it was a great opportunity to go learn. And I went there and I worked on enterprise software, or actually more specifically ERP, so like really like the underbelly of how large companies ran a lot of their data in that era internally. And so I was building internal reports and doing things like that. But I couldn't show my family what I was working on. And I was working on things that, may have been really valuable, but I couldn't really relate to as a user. And so I got the opportunity to go to Travelocity, and I did, and I became a software engineer there.
That's very interesting. And at that time, Travelocity was going through some changes, right, in the business. So what was that like to work for a company like that? It was rapidly evolving.
Yeah, so this was 2002, and Travelocity had been a pioneer in online travel. And it actually, so American Airlines made a software baby called Sabre, and that made an online baby called Travelocity. And so Travelocity spun out and was its own company. It was actually, I think, a publicly listed company at one point, but then it got privatized. It got pulled back into Sabre, and so I joined after all of that. And so it was a highly competitive time. Expedia and Orbitz were really coming hard at Travelocity, who'd been a pioneer in the space. If you did consumer research and showed them the 3 websites without the logos on them, consumers had no idea which was which. So there was no differentiation whatsoever. So it was kind of a slog in that, you were trying to just figure out how to make sure that the unit economics, the numbers behind the business really worked, while also trying to build, a better user experience. But the user experience was a little bit of an afterthought at that point, as compared to just the realities of travel, which where there's not a lot of money to go around, and there was so much competition in this space.
So how did you end up deciding to go back to school, to come here to Berkeley for an MBA?
Well, so this is where my product management journey begins. How many of you are interested in product management? Okay, I thought so. So I started as a software engineer, and then I started asking questions that weren't technical in nature. They increasingly were really about the business. Why does it work this way? Why do we pay Yahoo this much for the bookings that get made on Yahoo Travel? Why do we do this? Why do we do that? And I find that that's oftentimes the pathway that people have into product management, which is that you demonstrate a curiosity beyond just how the thing works, and to the questions that sort of precede that, which are like, what is it, and even why are we doing this? Like, what's the opportunity? What's the problem that we're solving? And so, when you get to a point where you're asking those questions, you're identifying the questions to ask, and you're helping lead a group of people to come together to answer those questions, then you're getting into the realm of product management. a lot of times people do product management first with a different title on their, on their LinkedIn or whatever. You're the tech lead, or you're an engineer, you're the engineer, but you're doing all of that stuff. Or sometimes it's a business person that is maybe the marketing person, but they've been tasked with driving growth to the site, and they can't drive growth to this website or to this app because the product stinks. And so they start kind of coming downstream into like, okay, well, we actually need to make it do this so that we can sort of sell this brand proposition out in the marketplace. And so there's a lot of different avenues to get into product management. But in 2003, when I first became interested in it, I was told that in order to be a product manager, you need an MBA. So I was like, that's interesting. I didn't know that. And so I thought about it for a little while, and then I filled out the application to Haas and stuck it in the digital hole, and then kind of went about my life. And then when I around the same time that I got notification that I had gotten into Haas, I actually got the PM job. And so I was at this interesting fork in the road, which is that I had I actually already had the job that I wanted. But now I had the opportunity to move to the Bay Area and go to business school and be part of this new community, and maybe to even take a step back and consider other things I might want to do. And so I took it. And so I came into business school having already been a product manager. So you would think that if you've already been an engineer and you've already been a product manager, and then you get an MBA, you've done it all. Like, you're good to go in product management for life. But when I actually came out of business school in 2007, the entire industry had shifted. Google had come on the scene, and Google had a culture that really championed the idea of being an engineering-driven culture. And so much so that they really thought of product management as a role where, first and foremost, you needed to earn the credibility of the engineers, and then you could do other things. But that was table stakes. And at that point, they had a pretty narrow view, in my opinion, as to what that entailed, and that was having a CS undergrad. So so now I've been a software engineer, a PM, I've gotten my MBA, and now I can't be a PM at Google because I didn't get a CS undergrad. So it's very confusing. And so I think that's one thing that is important to just know about product management, is that it does evolve every few years. And once you've done it long enough, you have this track record where it's like, breaking into acting. You're not an actor until you get your first gig. And so once you've done, a decent amount of product management, these things fall away. But particularly when you're early in your career, you may find a lot of times when people have very, regimented or preconceived notions about what the requirements are, the path is, the strengths are to be a product manager. And when you run into that, if you really want to be a product manager, just go to the next company over, because they're going to have a completely different version. Because I find that it's a very elusive role, in that it is so different between companies, but it also evolves sort of as an industry over time. And I've experienced that firsthand. And obviously, went on to be the chief product officer at Slack. But there have been a number of times in my career where I've really had to reprove that I had the background to be a product manager, in spite of a great track record and a list of qualifications that had at some point been the right list.
Do you think that had anything to do with you being a woman? I mean, in a male-dominated field. I mean, computer science even today is still dominated by men.
Yeah, I mean, possibly. I think that the decision to use a CS degree as the first order filter for product managers, whether intended or not, did have the effect of having far fewer women in product management. So my experience was that in the early 2000s, in the end of the first .com wave, there were a lot of women in product management, because it was considered more of a business or a general manager function. You needed just as much to understand how to manage a profit and loss, or understand how to keep track of the revenue for your tab on the website, as you needed to understand, the technical choices that your engineering team was making around the algorithm. But there was this time period where, it shifted. But I will say, in 2010, everything changed again. Because with mobile apps really proving that they could be a real business, suddenly consumers had the opportunity to switch to switch products more easily than ever. So if they didn't like Instagram, they go to Snapchat. If they didn't like, well, now I can't remember what else was popular in 2010. If they didn't like Twitter, they could go to Facebook or whatever. And so, in the mobile world, design became such an important part of it. Users downloaded the app, and if they couldn't figure it out, if they didn't get value from it, then you're toast. And so suddenly then actually design became this really important part of the conversation that had been totally an afterthought before. You used to write product specs, and as a PM, you would even draw the screens yourself, and then you would hand them to a designer to make them look good. If you did that to most designers in the industry now, they would not want to work with you because the role of design is much more thinking through the entire user experience, now being a thought partner from the outset, starting with the problem statement, not just sort of putting polish on something. And so what I saw in 2010 into 2015 in particular was this real shift around to the three-legged stool, this idea that product design and engineering all have equal worth and also an equal vote. And there's a lot of merit to that. It also was a time where it was hard to make decisions because it's hard for two people to make a decision. It's harder for three people to make a decision. So I would say we're shifting in a new direction, which I think actually comes back more to that GM sort of model where you've got a PM that is thinking about the overall success of the business more holistically.
So that's a pretty amazing story of just giving us a view of how quickly things are evolving in the business world. So we have a lot of students here who are taking business classes or enrolled in the MBA program. What advice do you have to them to just be able to prepare themselves well to be able to succeed, to thrive in an ever-changing, even faster, more quickly changing industry?
Yeah, so if you're totally new to the industry, my recommendation is to find a company where you can do product management for your internship. And that may include even working at a startup, potentially even taking, an unpaid or just very early stage startup or working on your own project for the summer. That's if you're totally new to the tech industry. Maybe you worked in finance before and you want to get into this, just because I just think it's such a big transition that just frankly you kind of need to try out the job and really kind of get in there and be ready to make some mistakes and fall on your face, but kind of deal with it and come out of it with that experience. Kind of like when I started my career as an engineer, but didn't really have a computer science background or, and so forth. So that's what I would recommend. If you're coming up through the tech industry, maybe you've been an engineer before, maybe you've been some adjacent role. So you've already got a network in the tech industry. Then I think you can take a little bit more of a natural path. You can really pick a product or an industry you're very excited about, really go chase the specific company you want to work for, and maybe even take a role that's not PM with the faith that if you get in there and you do great work, that you'll be able to find your opportunity to get into the PM industry. But it's different for everybody, but I just think that generally in careers, it's great if you're taking only one step at a time. So maybe you're staying in the same function, but you're changing industry, or you're staying in the same industry and you're changing functions. It's folks that are changing functions and changing industries that I think it's an inherently risky choice. So meet risk with risk. actually take a real risk and go do something. Use that summer to do something that is really outside of your comfort zone, and that maybe is not lucrative if you have the opportunity to do that. If you can kind of grit it out for the summer, because I think that's actually going to set you up for that kind of two steps at once career change.
That's great advice. So while you were an MBA student, you also had an internship, is that right, at Apple? Is that true?
I did. Is this on the record or off the record? Off the record. Okay. It's not. That makes it sound more exciting. I just always ask that halfway through a panel just to kind of keep people awake. I'm just kidding. So I took an internship at Apple, and I interviewed with 3 different teams. And two of them were product roles, and one of them was what's called demand generation. So it's ostensibly a marketing function where you're really responsible for driving growth. It's sometimes also called just growth at a lot of companies, where you're using either paid marketing or other means, app notifications, that sort of stuff to try to drive growth. And so I had not done the latter. I had done the former. I'm somebody that always wants to keep adding sort of new tools to my toolkit. And so, I generally stand by that mentality of, when you get the chance to learn something that's a step outside of what you've done before, go learn it and then come back to your core a little bit smarter, a little bit more perspective, a little bit more ability to connect to the dots. I generally stand by that. But I will say in this, I learned a valuable lesson, which is that when a recruiter sort of looks you dead in the eyes and says, you should really take that internship. You should take that internship. Like, why what do they have in it to trick you? And so what I didn't do was take the PM internship with the OS team because it sounded kind of boring to me for some reason. I just thought, we would just be working on like a menu. I didn't know what I was going to do all summer, and I wanted to try something new. But it turns out I was at Apple the summer before the iPhone launched, so it actually would have been the first version of iOS. Which you all may be familiar with. So that's like that's my like one that got away from a career standpoint. You're gonna always have those, but for that one, my lesson was that I think I was so fixed on what I thought I should be optimizing for. I thought that I should do something different. I didn't want to do the thing that seemed easy and obvious because it's like I got along with the team really well. It just clicked, and I kind of like was pig-headed and wanting to go to the thing that felt like there was like some pain and some learning opportunity. And in fact, instead it was just painful and not as fun. So,
okay, so that's
don't overthink it.
Definitely off the record. But that's great. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about your more recent experiences. You've worked at Twitter, you've worked at Slack, you were the chief product officer at Slack, and maybe you could let us know, what does a chief product officer do?
Hire people, and I mean, honestly, once you're on the executive team, once you're the most senior person in your function, your job really changes. And so you spend as much time, more time really, guiding the company with your team being the other execs as you do sort of thinking about the function that's the middle letter in your name. And so, I came to Chief Product Officer at Slack by joining as head of platform in 2015 and really taking what had been built at Slack and turning it into a true marketplace for teams of people at work to find new software tools to solve all sorts of needs for them in the workplace, and to help those software developers actually find an audience, so find customers. So I did that, and then the CEO, Stuart, asked me to step up as VP of product. And I would say all of that was still very product oriented. It's like setting a road mapping process, defining what's the quality bar, prioritizing, lots and lots of prioritizing, and then yes, building out a team, and especially hiring the leaders that are then going to hire the PM teams so that you can scale quickly. As CPO, though, I had responsibility for design, for research, for analytics, for a wider variety of things. And so at that point, you're going much less deep into any of those sort of function-specific, so in that case, product-specific things. Instead, you're really thinking about, okay, where are we going as a company? What is our headcount going to be next year? And what does that mean across the entire organization? What's our culture? What's the feedback we're hearing from employees about the experience they're having? Are we tackling diversity and inclusion head-on? So you're thinking about a lot of other things that become, frankly, a lot more people-oriented, which was an interesting learning for me and a lot of fun in its own way.
So since I assume there are many aspiring managers in the crowd, what makes for a successful manager and a leader, since you've hired many of them?
Yeah, I mean, a successful leader generally almost always has very strong communication skills, both written, but also the ability to get up in front of an audience. They don't have to, it's not about public speaking. It's about being able to effectively communicate ideas, give clear feedback, and at times use communication as a way to inspire people and get them pointing in the same direction, ideally moving as fast as possible. So communication is absolutely important, and that was one of the things that we had in my undergraduate program. Was there was a big focus on, we had a couple of business communication classes, and I do reflect on them and realize that they were some of the most directly applicable courses that we took. We were writing memos, which is funny because nobody writes memos anymore. I hope now they're writing Slack messages instead, which is a whole other form of leadership. How do you lead in Slack? But written and verbal communication, incredibly important. Secondly, I think the way that leadership doesn't start when you're a manager. Leadership starts the day you show up somewhere. And frankly, the minute you can have a bit of awareness and get outside of what you've been asked to do and just pull up a bit and figure out what problems you're solving for customers, what open questions are not getting addressed or even asked, identifying ways in which different teams are not working together well and trying to find solutions to fix it, then you're already a leader. And so everybody can be a leader. And, I saw some of the greatest leadership in Slack from some of the most junior people in the organization. And then as you become a manager, you have to do that, but also do the tactics of managing, which are like hiring people, holding them accountable for their deliverables, when they're not delivering, helping them understand that so that they can either course correct or, humanely sort of move on from the organization or into a different role that's a better fit for them. So that's all the management stuff, and there's a lot of work there. But the leadership stuff is for everybody.
Do you have any interesting stories from your time at Twitter or Slack that sort of helps to illustrate these principles?
Gosh, yeah, I'm sure I do. So I'll say when I arrived at Twitter, for example, have you guys ever seen the tweet button, like on the internet? Yeah. So when I arrived, I was assigned to work on the tweet button, and so it was an interesting setup because there were 3 engineers and then 2 PMs. And I don't know if you've ever worked on a team that was, those of you that have gotten to do some of these types of projects, that's a weird ratio. Usually that's too much PM for the project. But what I realized was that actually there was a bunch of other work that needed to happen to make the tweet button a success, and that there was plenty of space. So we could have immediately seen that and just been uncomfortable and just been like, hey, you need to put one of us onto another project. Instead, we actually, the other PM and I figured out we had very complementary skills. He had some really strong technical depth around how to scale the tweet button so that when you see it on all these sites across the web, it actually has the right number of times that page has been tweeted. I mean, that's a huge caching and scaling technical challenge. And so he worked really closely with the engineers to understand what our tolerances were. Like, how right did it have to be? How do we actually architect this? How do we address security issues, et cetera? What I realized was that this was an important moment for Twitter to signal to the world that Twitter was an important way that people would discover the news. Because this was in 2010 when people mostly thought about Twitter as a place to say, like I had a bran muffin for breakfast or whatever. And what was actually happening, we could see, was that many of the tweets had URLs in them. And so this is where people were getting their news. And it's a little hard to go back there now and remember that that wasn't always the case, that people weren't getting their news on places like social media. But this was a novel idea. And so I instead focused on what I would call product marketing, which is, so we had this product, it had these capabilities, but what could it actually enable? And so really talking to what we call publishers, so New York Times or ESPN.com or all these different media websites, as well as small ones like I don't know, somebody's cooking blog or whatever, and helping them understand that by putting the tweet button on their website, they were actually making it easier for their readers to be able to share links to their website, which was going to drive traffic to them. And traffic was what they needed because they made money with ads and they needed more eyeballs coming to their website. So I actually built this, basically a launch plan for this, which is like, let's go to 10 companies and let's get them to implement it so that when we say this is announced, it goes live all at the same time. It's really hard to do. It's like a lot of coordination because not all of those companies even have the ability to just ship code in the middle of the day if they want to. But lining that up really told the story in a different way. And I had this deck that I used, that I made this, PowerPoint deck, and it explained, why you wanted to do this and how you did it. And it was just a set of slides, but it actually got leaked, and it was on Fox News. So my slides were on Fox News. But when we actually had the announcement, our VP of product, Jason Goldman, announced that he considered it to be the most important and most successful launch that Twitter had ever had. And so in a case where it seemed like we actually were stepping on each other's toes, we found ways to actually grow the pie of what was possible, and we made for a much more powerful launch for the business, and it showed the company kind of how you can do those things, and that was kind of the way that we did things going forward.
It's a really outstanding example of how so many things, teamwork, just innovation, and just getting a new functionality out there and communicating the value. I'm just curious, which 10 companies were the first ones to have the Twitter button?
I won't remember all of them, but I know the New York Times and ESPN were one of them. So using my business hat, this was post-business school, I kind of thought of market segmentation. So I thought of all of the online media properties. What did we want to show? We didn't, because this is so early that it wasn't even clear that Twitter was for everybody. And so I didn't want to just have technology like TechCrunch. I wanted to have sports stuff, and I wanted to have some media outlets that were oriented towards women. I can't remember which one it was, but there was some media outlet that was like a woman-oriented, news site, and so made sure to have them as well. Maybe one about parenting. So very deliberately chose ones that were going to show where when they saw the logos on the day of the launch, they could see like, oh wow. Okay, Twitter's different than I thought it was. And these are all websites I follow, so maybe that means I should also be using Twitter.
So you really kept in mind that you wanted to target a very diverse, customer base. That's fantastic. So that might lead to my next question. Just let's talk about your experience with, or hashtag angels, right? You started that when you were at Twitter. Is that right? And then now you've decided most recently to spend all your time on hashtag angels. So maybe you could share with our students what it's all about, and what's the latest initiative under that hashtag.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, one of the things at its core, and I'll just say this as sort of a word of warning up front, is that one of the things we talk a lot about in hashtag angels is we talk about the financial aspects of working in the tech industry. We talk about the money, and that and we do that because we think it's important, particularly for women, underrepresented minorities, as well as, frankly, even just anybody who grew up not in Silicon Valley and Palo Alto, or like right here in the middle of this industry, where maybe whose parents did not work in that industry, to understand how this works, because there are a lot of misconceptions about it. The idea, there's kind of the doomsday tale of like the dot-com busts, and people having these horrible experiences, working really hard, and then it all turns into nothing. And then you also see the other side of it. You see these CEO founders who get celebrated and who have these just like enormous outcomes that sort of make them larger than life, and they kind of get to do whatever they want to, and sometimes those things aren't very good. And So I just want to share that premise up front. So we were coming out of Twitter. There were 6 of us. We were all women. The thing we had in common, in addition to being women, was that we were each the most senior woman in our part of the company. So there's a sisterhood or kinship that happens where you can't help but know the other people like you. Whatever however you identify, the other people in the room that you feel are have had a shared experience to you. So even though we didn't all necessarily work together, we had that in common. And so, Twitter had an IPO in 2013, and because it had an IPO, that meant our stock turned into actual some amount of cash. And one of the things that we saw our male peers doing was going and angel investing in companies. So now they were taking the money they'd made, and they were going and backing the next set of companies. And we wanted to participate in that. You were like, hey, what about us? Like, we have a lot to offer, and also like our money's green too. And so we basically wrote a Medium post. We called ourselves hashtag angels as a nod to sort of our Twitter background, and the idea was that if one of us decides to back you, that you sort of get access to all of us. I mean, within reason. But this is the way angel investing works anyway. It's a very network-driven business. One angel investor will decide to back a company, and he'll go tell his 3 other favorite investors, hey, I'm going in, like I saved a little bit of room for you. Do you want to get in on this one? And so what we did was, just by building that brand, we frankly just kind of like brought some transparency to how this process actually works. And so we started that. We started investing in companies. We each make our own decisions. So we don't like vote. Many of the companies have only one of us as an investor, and a very, very, very small number have all of us as an investor, and then you have everything in between. So we've invested in companies. In doing so, we found out there are a lot of other women in the industry that want to do it too. And so we've built some community around that and got people together to just talk about these things and built a lot of goodwill in doing that. We built relationships with the venture firms by actually giving them the opportunity to pay for our dinners. What an opportunity, right? It is, because we bring these amazing women who are in all sorts of awesome roles, founders and C-level execs and directors of engineering that everybody wants to hire, and we've brought them together. And so we've actually found that, you know, there's a space for us to connect our two networks, which is like this sort of entrenched set of venture capitalists that hold a lot of money and a lot of power, and this network of women that we know. They both want to know. They want to know each other, and so we've been able to help facilitate some of that. And then thirdly, we've done some interesting studies around gender equity that we can talk about if we have time. But I'll pause there, and we can keep going into that if that turns out to be the most interesting thing.
Okay, I think it might be good for us to let some of the students in the audience ask you some questions at this point. Cool. Is there a roaming microphone?
Can you tell us a little bit about the types of companies that angels invest in?
Yeah, so we each have our own focus areas. I started really focused. One of the things I was really excited about was digital health. So backed a few companies that were oftentimes building software for sort of the healthcare field. I'm going to wait to see how the companies that I backed, and some of them are doing great. I'm going to sort of like let that cohort of companies kind of mature, and I've now shifted my focus into two areas. One is enterprise software, because I just worked at Slack for 4 years, and I can see that there are a bunch of really smart people that want to build software that humans actually want to use for work. And so there's just a lot of, there are people building new design tools, new accounting tools, et cetera, et cetera. And so I am investing in that space now that I've left Slack. But the area that I'm most passionate about now is actually companies that have it as their primary mission to drive a reversal in climate change. So I just think that there's, for me, the need is absolutely existential. I feel lucky to be able to focus on what I want to now because I'm operating independently. And so for me, that's it. And I also think that the time is right. I think that consumers care about this more than ever. And I think that there's technology, some of which some of you are working on possibly, that could really provide real breakthroughs in this space. So the great news is we get to keep shifting it whenever we want to. And we each do that.
Hi. So in trying all these things and like learning so many different things in fields, from like business to CS, and do you ever fear being like kind of jack of all trades, master of none? And do you think it played extra well into kind of the product and product manager path that you took? And do you think for some people that might not be the right strategy, or some positions, it's better to just dive deeper and specialize rather than learn more about all these different areas and kind of have your fingers in too many pies,
Yeah, I think it depends on what your goals are. Certainly for a lot of my career, I was always doing one thing at a time. And product management was really the common thread. Like if you were to look at like a little chart of my wandering, like I passed back through product, every couple of years, really. So that's the most. There's a lot of I've stayed fresh with product management by not veering so far away from it that that my skills get out of date. But I would say that, so I'll be 40 next year. So I've had, because I started really in college, I've had about a 20-year career. There is a point where, if you're looking to take a senior leadership role, you're going to take on things you've never done before. But I would much rather have, teams in my organization where maybe I've done half of them, or I've done, one of them, and I've actually like had some exposure, I've worked closely with, say, for example, design and product marketing, and maybe research. Until research was in my team, I'd never done it before. But at some point, you actually start to develop the ability to hire great leaders and provide oversight for those teams without actually having done the thing that they do. But the way that you do that, in my opinion, is that you've actually developed enough of your own. You've like sort of developed the ability to learn new functions so that it gets faster and faster and faster to a point where you don't actually have to have done it to be able to ask the questions and provide the kind of people leadership that's necessary for you to be a credible leader for them, even if you don't look like that team. So I think that, if you stay on a single track, there are absolutely all sorts of great paths, and particularly if that's a track that is in very high demand, like software engineering, for example, or a lot of other, finance, for example. You can go all the way up and be CFO, but if you have a desire to potentially someday lead a company, or be a COO, or be the kind of leader that can actually take on a variety of things within the organization and take on more and more responsibility for the company at large, then you have to develop that skill set. And for me, there's no way I would have been able to do that if I hadn't done what looked like wandering at the time, and in retrospect is like a collection of areas of expertise that actually honed my ability to learn faster.
Hi. Oh. Oh, me. Okay. Hi, I'm Emily. I'm studying EECS at Berkeley. I love your Cal-themed outfit for today.
Thank you. It wasn't totally on purpose, but then once I realized it totally was.
Yeah. So my question for you is, how do you decide what companies to invest in? Besides the mission thing that you touched on, do you look at certain qualities that founders have, or how strongly you think that this company has for success, or how do you measure that?
I look for what I believe to be a big opportunity. If you work inside of a venture capital firm, there's a whole team that pulls data for you, and you can look at the other 10 companies in the space really quickly and maybe even see their revenue, things that you in theory shouldn't be able to know. If you're operating on your own, you can kind of ask some smart people, but you're flying a little bit blind on that. So you I'm mostly going off of gut. I'm doing a little bit of internet, Googling, and just, kind of squinting and saying, is this a big opportunity? Historically, I have really had a bias, and I think bias is not always a bad thing, particularly in investing. Consistency can sometimes be valuable, because then you can look at your portfolio performance and say, well, that's working or not working, and then you can adjust. If you kind of change your biases every single time you invest, then it's harder to know. So for me, I've had a bias towards founders with some amount of experience. The reason for that is because it matches with my skill set, which I know how to hire. I know how to hire product, directors of product or senior product managers. I don't know exactly how to hire, biomedical engineers that, particularly that may be very early in their career, where they may have incredible smarts, but maybe they don't have practical experience that they can point to, where I can say, okay, well, it seems like everywhere you go, you knock it out of the park. So that's a really good sign for me. So I've had that bias, but and that has been, I think, okay for the areas that I've been investing in, because they're known quantities. As I shift to focus on what I consider to be really a new frontier, which is the climate space, I'm realizing I need to throw that away. And one of the companies I'm looking at backing right now is a team of 5 engineers that are just coming out of undergrad, one of which who actually dropped out to run the company. And that's a very different profile of companies than I've looked at before. And so it feels scary for me. Will I be able to help them in the right ways? Do I have the ability to assess their technical depth? Not as much, but I can look at whether they can articulate a market opportunity, and whether they seem to have real conviction and passion for what they're doing that's going to last over a long enough time period where they can actually see whether or not they're onto something. And so that's what I'm looking for in that space. And so we'll see whether I'm good at identifying it and whether that rubric is right.
Hi, I'm Dhaval. I'm an alumni Haas. What do you see about the state of the cycle right now in the Valley? In terms, what's your crystal ball say? I know it's tough to predict, but
yeah, I mean, I think there are a number of signs that are adding up that are not super encouraging, that probably one could have seen coming, that many people did see coming. Just valuations going up in large part because of funds or even specific to SoftBank Vision Fund, which is an investor in Slack, which has invested so much money in companies, it's actually allowed them to delay going public much longer than they would have in the past. There's a lot of benefits to that. I mean, being a private company is awesome. You get to change your strategy as much as you want to. If you decide you don't care that the business slows a little bit because you have this product product vision that's like really valuable, that you really believe in, you can go for it. That's, once you're a public company, you have to actually convince public market investors, you have to convince the world that that's the right strategy. So it has, I think, been valuable for innovation, but now we are in this situation where, a number of the IPOs that have gone out this year have seen, drop off from the initial excitement when they first came out. You see, I hear anecdotes of venture funds that are just slowing down a little bit, just kind of taking a breather. Don't deploy all the money in 2019, just kind of see where we are in 2020. And then obviously we have this broader political and macroeconomic backdrop around public policy, global economy that is, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be well placed to be a very successful investor. But I would just say it makes me cautious.
We've got a question over here.
Hello, my name is Albert. I would like to say thank you for your talk. I'm a biology major, and you talked about how you didn't have a CS undergrad education. So I was wondering, how do you demonstrate your skills beyond the resume when seeking employment and seeking experience?
Honestly, the types of roles I'm interviewing for now, I'm not being interviewed by people that are technical enough to really grill me like I would have been even 5 or 10 years ago. So that shifts at some point. But I would say, for example, I joined a 20-person startup between Google and Twitter. And when I joined there, I interviewed with the technical founder and so forth. And, I'm able to engage in a discussion where we reason through the connection between a problem space and potential solutions. And I'm able to have a dialogue where, if an engineer presents a solution to me, I can ask questions or help give input in a way where I'm not dictating how it should be done. I'm instead helping communicate what would success look like, and gut checking that to say, okay, well, that sounds like it makes sense to me. Let's just talk through a couple scenarios. So what if we were to exceed our wildest expectations, and 12 months from now we've seen 20x growth? Would this work still? And then you talk through that. What if we decided to launch this in another country that had maybe some different requirements? What would have to be different? And so there's a way to sort of stress test where, frankly, and engineers also need to have this ability to be able to stress test their own assumptions around what's needed against the actual needs for the business. And it can't just be for what you need today. You also need to be talking about what's the range of possibilities. And at some point you close that door and you say, okay, well, we're not going to think about all that stuff right now, but at least we kind of aired it out so that we have hopefully anticipated major deviations from our assumptions that could lead the thing that gets built to be very different from what's actually needed in a short amount of time, which I've seen happen a lot. And I saw it as an engineer and I've seen it as a product manager. And that's been one of the things I've always tried to do, which is to be a bridge between those two and almost like a form of insurance to try to ask questions about the future, the possible future, that help reduce pain if those have been ignored.
Hi, my name is Olanka. I'm an international MBA student. I'm considering a range of career paths that I think are helpful for being an entrepreneur, including VC, PM, and actually working on a startup. What I would ask you is, can you think of any downsides or plus sides to either of those options? And would you add anything else to that mix?
Sorry, can I think of any downsides
to either of those roles, either in VC, PM, or actually going to work for a startup, if the goal is get experience that helps you be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think so basically a venture-backed startup versus early stage. Either. Okay. I think you should always be trying to find a problem you actually care about getting up and working on every day. And it doesn't. Especially while you're learning. Let's be real. It doesn't have to be the thing that you think you're put on this earth to do. You've got to learn some things along the way. And so you're going to work on some things where at some point you might get bored of them, but you've learned something along the way. And I have lots of those experiences in my career. But to the extent possible, a problem that you're excited to get up and work on every day, and people that you can learn, people that you want to work alongside and learn with. And I think if you can find those two ingredients and you're really developing a new skill set, I mean, most of the time it's just like, go for it. I mean, I think sometimes it can be, especially for people that have gotten good grades and have like worked really, have always sort of, checked the boxes. The startup world, I think, can feel a little fuzzy because it's like, well, what if I work on this thing and it like folds at the end of the year? You know what? If you learn some amazing experience and you can talk about the things that you worked on, then that's okay. That's part of the system. That there's nothing wrong with that. And but I would always look to work with people, working in a supportive environment with people that you really think you're going to learn from and enjoy learning alongside. Because it's hard to get much value out of an environment where you don't at least have that.
One last question.
Final call. If not, I will close it out with a question of my own. Question front. Cool.
Hi, I'm Carly, and I'm a senior in the Haas School of Business. And I was wondering what the value of you was to getting your MBA after having a business degree in undergrad, and how you already had an established career. So what did you get out of your MBA, and would you suggest for people who get an undergrad degree in business to go back and get their MBA?
One of the most valuable things that I got out of that experience was time. And I think if I had to do it again, I would even make better use of the time. I went to business school when I was 25 because I graduated when I was 21. And so I was on the young end of Haas. I don't know what it is now, but there were like 5 of us. And we eventually realized there was something wrong with us. It wasn't like it wasn't like awesome that we were 25. We were like, what happened to us that we didn't have enough fun before we like decided to go back to business school? So I would say there's nothing wrong with like taking your time to get there. But for me, I think business school or any sort of graduate school presents a real opportunity to try your hand at starting something. And I think that there are few opportunities where you basically get access to like time, the air cover of like the fact that you're in school, the fact that people will help you. And then, I don't know the latest in student loan funding, but hopefully there's access to some like relatively cheap capital that you can use to basically make it so that you can take a break from working to try something new out. And whether that's studying a different field, but very specifically, I wish that I had just started a company while I was in school. And I don't even know if I would have needed to like do it with like the full weight of like, I'm definitely going to do this after business school, but instead just to take maybe starting my second semester, take the time to start to go through the motions of what it would look like to like sit down with like really get to know somebody and see if we had a common problem we were excited about working on, start to get into a Google Doc and imagine what that might be and see if it went somewhere. And there were classmates of mine that did that. And I think had I been a couple more years into my career, I definitely would have done it. I hadn't really had the startup exposure yet though, so I didn't have that muscle. So I hope that, and I know this is a big focus for Dean Harrison around entrepreneurship and innovation, but I would love to see that idea planted in students for those of us that don't show up on campus with that already in our heads.
All right, with that, let's please join me in thanking April for spending her evening with us.